pleasure because we'll be debating a bit today about the effective strategies for libertarians in politics. Both gentlemen are in politics and both believe in freedom, in libertarian values. They just have quite different strategies. So I'll start with the question to both of you. Maybe Chase can start. Alex will speak second. What does it mean to be a freedom candidate? What does it take to be freedom candidate? And what are the core values that such candidates should represent?
Yeah. So as a libertarian, I look to, the word freedom, meaning free from regulation of one's life so long as you're living in peace. So I look for somebody who values the non-aggression principle, who basically says that if you're living your life in peace and not harming another person, there should be no need for a government or any other entity to regulate your life or your behavior because you're exercising good self-governance. And so those are the values that I would like to see freedom candidates pushing forward, as one of self-ownership, self-reliance, and one of getting the government out of our lives, whether it's in our pocketbooks, our bedrooms, our boardrooms, really wherever we're exercising peaceful behavior. The only legitimate need for government is to protect one's civil liberties from being violated by another. Those are the principles that I want to see freedom candidates moving forward. Really, as a libertarian, I think this is the best party for it. But really, whatever party you're running in, if that's what you're running on, that's a good principle to be running for.
Thank you, Alex.
So I see it very simply. A freedom candidate is one for whom, when they take the oath of office, they actually mean it. Every elected representative in Arizona, most other place in the country, swear an oath to towards the Bill of Rights in the federal Constitution and the Declaration of Rights in the Arizona State Constitution. Everybody says that they mean it, and then will vote for bills that they know are unconstitutional, that they know violates folks' natural rights. And if you are seeking office and get into office and you don't do that, you're a freedom candidate.
Alex, now question to you. Why a libertarian, small L libertarian, should vote for Republican Party if this is a conservative party, really? Most politicians and voters, they declare to be conservative. And so why a libertarian would vote for such a party?
It's funny that you draw a dichotomy between those two things, Jacek, because the Republican who was named Mr. Conservative was actually the guy who started the modern libertarian movement. That would be my home state senator, Barry Goldwater. The libertarian movement originated in the GOP, and it has won all of its successes through the GOP. Not only was Goldwater elected to the Senate multiple times, Rand Paul, Ron Paul, Thomas Massey, these are all libertarian-leaning folks who are also conservatives, because those two things are not incompatible. What are we conserving? As conservatives, we're conserving the principles of the American Revolution, entirely compatible with also being a libertarian-minded person, right? But those victories were won as Republicans. Now, I have a little bit of an interesting background because I'm not only vice chair of the Elections Committee in the House, but I'm also a political lawyer, have been for a long time. So I will tell you very simply what the Libertarian Party actually is. The Libertarian Party is actually a Democrat front group. It's meant to siphon off votes from Republicans, just like the Green Party is meant to siphon off votes from Democrats. And if you ever look at the lawyers who represent these various parties, which I do, you'll usually find the oddity that really MAGA lawyers are representing the Green Party, and really liberal lawyers are representing the Libertarian Party. And a lot of the funding for both also comes from really the other side. It's very counterintuitive. Here's the way our political system works. Our political system is a first-past-the-post system. That means that we're only ever going to have two major parties because of the way the system is designed. But that's okay, because guess what? Countries that don't have a first-past-the-post system, they also only have two major parties. In those cases, they have a government and an opposition. And there might be multiple parties in the government. There might be multiple parties in the opposition. Here, we form our coalitions before the election, and we do it through either the Democrat Party or the Republican Party. So there is a very lively liberty movement in the Republican Party. I'm proud to be part of it. And if we had libertarians come over and participate, because I don't think you guys should just vote Republican, I think you should become Republican precinct committeemen. 10 libertarians who decide to change their registration, become Republican precinct committeemen, they could elect a libertarian Republican candidate in most districts in my state if they only had the desire to actually make an impact for liberty. You know, Mr. Oliver, and I'm wrapping up. Mr. Oliver, you know, he ran for office on getting the balanced budget amendment into law. Republicans in Arizona did that. He ran on universal school choice funding that follows students, but not systems. Republicans in Arizona actually did that, right? He ran on firearms freedom. Arizona has the most freedom-oriented firearms laws anywhere in the United States. And it was Republicans who did that. So if you're serious about liberty, I would encourage you to join the vehicle that is the hope and the vehicle for freedom in this country, the Republican Party, my party.
Thank you, Alex. Chase, why a libertarian should vote for a Libertarian Party despite its rather not very big influence and not great results in elections?
Yeah, so first, I just want to speak to those three issues you mentioned. You mentioned education, firearms, and balancing the budget. 49 states out of this country, blue ones and red ones, have a balanced budget amendment. That's very common to happen in a state, but national Republicans never balance the budget. At least they haven't in my adult lifetime. Education. Yes, I fight to free education from the federal government. Why? Because it was the Republican President George Bush that added tons of funding to the Department of Education with no child left behind. I fight for firearms freedom because the man I was running against in the Republican Party wanted to raise the age to buy a gun, wanted to pass red flag laws and other unconstitutional violations of our Second Amendment rights. And so it's important for us to have a libertarian voice in our national elections. It really is, if for no other reason, to give libertarian voters a clean conscience when they go to the voting booth. I respect that Barry Goldwater started the modern libertarian movement here in America within the Republican Party. Now, libertarianism is much older than that, but I respect that. But I also understand that there's a reason why members of the Republican Party left that party in 1971 to form the Libertarian Party. It's because we took ourselves off the gold standard. It's because we put ourselves into a war that required a draft. It's because the Republican Party itself was moving against Barry Goldwater in a very unlibertarian direction. And we needed to have a party for those people who supported many of the principles that Goldwater fought for to be able to vote and cast their vote with a clear conscience, which is what libertarians provide. We put ideas out into the political atmosphere that later do get adopted. Many times we are the stream that mainstream political opinion follows. We carve that path ahead of time. We've done so with drug laws, which is why now over half the country lives in a state with legal recreational cannabis, including the state of Arizona. That's because libertarians led on that 50 years ago, and it took 50 years for Democrats and Republicans to catch up. It is important for us to run as libertarians. Yes, right now the system is set up to back up a political binary of Republicans and Democrats because that's the system that's been provided to us by Republicans and Democrats. If we had ranked choice voting, if we had more ballot access, if we had better chances to perform coalition governments in this country, we would see 3, 4, 5 major parties appearing. We should at least have them on the debate stage. The fact is right now we have a political system that is backed up by a major media conglomerate, the people who back our political system, to reinforce this binary. That's why you only have 2 people on stage. I used to be able to blame the Commission on Presidential Debates, which was made up of Democrats and Republicans, and of course they're not going to allow a libertarian voice on the stage. But in this last election, they walked away from that. Why? Because the Republicans said the debates were rigged, they were too woke, they were wrong, we need to leave the CPD. And what did they do? They walked right into the major media networks and they colluded with the Democrats to make sure that those were the only 2 voices on those debate stages. They are doing everything they can to prevent libertarians from having a voice. And I argue, if you are a libertarian, when you go into the Republican Party, very rarely, if ever, do you make the party more libertarian. You always become more Republican. That's what happens every single time. Look at past candidates who have run as libertarians who then later become Republicans. And what do they have to do? They have to compromise to get to the head. They have to sell themselves to get those committee seats, or they get nothing done. They get completely ignored. I respect the heck out of Ron Paul. He was a messenger for liberty in the Congress, and he said a lot of things, but guess what he didn't get? A lot of bills passed because he had no support from the National Republican Party to support those things. They let him have his district, they let him vote for speaker, and that's all they cared about, because that's what the National Republican Party does. They use people, they bring people into the movement promising freedom. I guarantee you right now, I'll make a bet with anybody right now, I'll bet you an entire Bitcoin right now, that right now our government will be smaller than it's going to be in 4 years from now. It will grow. Department of Government Efficiency, whatever. It's not going to happen, because when we have Democrats or Republicans, we only have growth. That's why we need to tear down the system and vote Libertarian.
So now I want to ask both of you about current political situation, because November 5th was actually a very big victory for Republican Party, but to be more precise, for the so-called MAGA movement, Make America Great Again, which is not exactly libertarian movement, right? It has some pro-freedom messages, but some different messages like high tariffs, no to less immigration, and so on and so forth. I want both of you to tell us, is the victory of MAGA movement and Donald Trump good news for liberty, or rather not good news? Who wants to start?
I can start.
Alex?
I think it's tremendously good news for the liberty movement. There's both superficial reasons for that, like, come on, guys, Tulsi Gabbard is literally going to be the director of national intelligence, and she hates those guys. Like, it's beautiful. But also on a deeper level, one of the things that we as people who are in the MAGA movement would say to each other with great frequency, especially those of us who, like me, have actually been targets of this regime's lawfare. One of the things we would say to each other when we're having our private meetings is, do you know what time it is? It's later than you think it is. And you could absolutely see this, not just with the carceral state that was springing up to send political opponents off to the gulag, but the censorship regime that the feds and state Democrats colluded on in order to censor our speech online, and prohibit legitimate debate. And by the way, all debate is legitimate debate on topics of public concern, like during COVID, like about our elections administration, all of that, right? And if Kamala Harris had gotten elected, by the way, right, what is her actual job? What is she by training? She's a prosecutor. She was running for prosecutor in chief. Then the slide into dictatorship would have been absolutely irreversible. That's why I think it is a phenomenal, wonderful thing. You don't understand. I talk to voters all the time. Okay, it's my job. And these people were terrified, not just people like me who are out in front, normal people. I had so many people call me up and say, Alex, I want to publish, I want to put on Twitter this post that's critical of Chris Mays, but I'm worried that if I do, she'll come after me. Chris Mays is our attorney general. How can you help me write it in such a way that she can't come after me? That is a conversation that no politician in America should ever have to have with a constituent, ever. And that when I say the GOP is the hope and the vehicle, we're not perfect. We're not. But what we are and what the MAGA movement is exactly what Mr. Oliver is pretending to be, which is we are against this regime. We are against this establishment. If you look at the people that Trump is appointing, they are predominantly people who are from totally outside of the establishment, right? Because we understand that the establishment has brought us to the absolute brink of dictatorship. And that is why we are a movement that is worth supporting.
Thank you. Chase?
I'm going to not have quite as a rosy color picture of things. And here's why. First off, you're right. Marco Rubio, noted outsider, is going to be leading the State Department. We have Elise Stefanik is going to be leading the UN. A lot of these people who are going to be perpetuating the same war machine that we've been seeing. So there might be some outsiders. And I'm glad that Tulsi's going to get a chance to, hopefully, she's going to end the Patriot Act and end the FISA abuses and end the warrantless wiretapping and the metadata gathering. But I bet she won't. I bet once she gets the power, she's going to be very corrupted by that power, because that's what happens a lot of times when people who are critics of government get into government. But I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to see that hopefully happens. But what I fear is that we're going to have another Republican administration, just like we've had another Democratic administration, Republican administration. The same wheels are going to keep on turning. The debt's going to keep growing. The war machine's going to keep perpetuating itself. And as far as censorship, we had a candidate for president who's now our president-elect who was, talking about just let's remove licenses from broadcasters because they're saying things I don't like or conducting interviews that I'm not supportive of. It's not like he's a champion of free speech either. This is the mask that Republicans try to put over the movement. They try to make it seem like they're for smaller government. The government never shrinks. They want to seem like they're for free speech, but they elect a guy who champions the idea of censorship. This is the two-party trick. This is the trick of our government on both wings. They are two wings of the same bird. This is the problem with duopoly. This is the problem we have this false political binary because it's political pro wrestling. They go into the ring and they act like they're fighting each other. They act like they're really against each other. But what are they doing? They're fighting for their own power, for their own gain, and for our current president-elect for his own personal, he wants to make himself look good. And this is the problem with Donald Trump. He is not a principled individual. He is somebody who goes with wherever he thinks somebody will give him flattery, the direction he needs to go in. That's where he goes. Wherever somebody gives him flattery is where he goes. I love Kim Jong-un because he said something nice about me. Things like this. Like the fact is we need somebody that can stand on principle. And right now, the Republican Party is not being led by somebody who's being led on principle. You're right. Kamala Harris would have been the prosecutor in chief. Donald Trump is the failed businessman in chief. Neither of those things are good. Neither of those things are great for America. And I worry about what's going to happen when we allow somebody who claims the mantle of freedom but does many things that are very anti-libertarian and anti-freedom in our name. It sullies the name of liberty. This is why it's important to have a Libertarian Party. It's why it's important to have a party that stands on principle. Whether we get 600,000 votes, 1 million votes, or no votes, it's important for us to have somebody who is standing on principle who's saying, this is what liberty is supposed to be. And when we see the Democrats and Republicans bastardize that, that's why we stand firm in our principles so we can expose it. So no, I don't think, there may be some gains for liberty here and there, but on the whole, this is just repeating the cycle. It's repeating the Democrat-Republican cycle over and over again.
Thanks. Alex, I know that you are not only against illegal immigration, but you also would like to reduce legal immigration to the United States. Well, being a foreigner and running Project Arizona, we need to get visas for our students to come here, and it's very, very hard. So I would even say that immigration laws in the U.S. right now are very complicated and very, very tough. Why are you in favor of making it even harder than it is?
Well, that's a good question, Jacek. I do, before I want to get on to that, want to address two of the points that Mr. Oliver's made. He's treating Republicans as if we're a monolith, which I thought libertarians were not supposed to do. Libertarians were supposed to look at the individuals, right? And there are individuals within the Republican Party, myself included, right, that believe in most of what he's saying in terms of, hating the Patriot Act, like, count me as number one. But the difference between us and them, right, is that we actually get elected and we get a chance to do something about it, right? I've been pretty effective at getting pro-liberty bills passed and signed. I'm good at that. And it hurts my heart that we have such a pro-liberty guy as this sitting on this stage instead of sitting in the United States Senate, which is where he possibly would be if he had run in the Republican primary instead of running as a separate party. So I did want to make those points. Now, in terms of the immigration issue, what you don't understand, Jacek, because you come from a country that is rational on such issues, is that our immigration system in this country is terribly, terribly broken. We don't have an immigration system that's based on merit. Actually, we have an immigration system that's based on the opposite of merit, right? It's based on family reunification. So our entire immigration system is essentially based on, well, if you have a family member here, then you get priority in the system. Liberty doesn't survive without folks who actually want it to. And my requirement for somebody who is allowed to immigrate to America is that I would only allow Americans to immigrate to America, because that's the only way we keep our system of freedom alive. It does no good, right, to trade freedom in one area, the freedom to move across borders, right, for every other freedom that we enjoy in this country. To me, that is an unacceptable trade-off. And so until we refocus our immigration system on bringing in people who actually want to be here because of our values of liberty, then we do need to reduce it so that we have time to assimilate the immigrants that we are getting, who may come from very different systems, may have very different mentalities, and inculcate in them our values, because that's what immigration is about, so that we can remain a cohesive and stable society that is dedicated to our founding principles and not backslide into tyranny.
Thank you. We'll open the discussion to the public in maybe about 10 minutes, so we'll have a chance to dig deeper into these issues. I still have a few questions. Now, the one to Chase. Chase, you are a member of Libertarian Party, and we have quite few libertarians from Eastern Europe here, and they have some legit fears about Putin's Russia, which is a country that is a land-hungry country, a land-hungry regime, I would say, and it has some quasi-totalitarian attitude, and it's not valuing freedoms of its citizens at all. Yet, 1 year ago, maybe a little bit more than 1 year ago, your party held a rally in Washington, D.C. It was an anti-war rally, right? But it was done hand by hand with American communists. They were Russian and Soviet flags waving. How do you feel about it?
Well, I would say quasi-totalitarian is probably the nicest way anybody has described Putin's governance. I am anti-war. I've been an anti-war activist for a long time. I think that kind of confusing anti-war with pro-Putin is a bad thing. I oppose the United States war machine involving itself in the Ukraine war. I do. I oppose the United States militarily funding Ukraine. I think Eastern Europe, or rather Western Europe, and the rest of the continent needs to be leading the way militarily if there's a military solution. But it doesn't mean that I don't think that Putin is a terrible human being, that he's violating the sovereignty of another nation by invading them, and we need to call that out, and I'm happy to. I'm also happy to say that there are things we can do to help save human lives in Ukraine. We can allow refugees to come to this country who want to come here and stay until the war is over and they can be resettled back home, or stay here if they want. I honestly don't care as long as they're wanting to be peaceful people. And we can also make the same offer of amnesty to any member of the Russian military who's being conscripted to fight in that war. I believe conscription is slavery, and there should be no better reason to provide someone amnesty than to say you shouldn't have to be forced into servitude with a gun in your hand to murder people. And so I think we can do these things to help demoralize the Russian front lines, to help allow Europe to take the lead militarily. But no, I don't think it's a great idea for us to be pro-Putin. I am not pro-Putin. I think he's a horrible human being.
So what I had in mind is that that party, they are openly sympathetic towards Putin. And I don't say that LP had an event which is anti-war. That's okay, right? It's the company, the communists are just despicable company to be with, I think, anywhere.
I would agree. And if you noticed, I was not on that stage. Wasn't invited to be on that stage. And if I were, I would have had a problem with a lot of the speakers who were invited there. And for me, it's important for us to be a anti-war party without being pro any government involved in a war. I'm anti-war because the idea that a government uses its force to kill and injure and maim and displace innocent people for no reason is wrong. And that's why I've always been vocal against the American war machine. It's why I'm vocal against what Vladimir Putin does. I think what he is doing is wrong. Put your troops back over in Russia. Fix your own country before you try to take over others. And for me, I wouldn't have been very accepting of the speakers at that rally. I would have loved to have spoken at an anti-war rally. Maybe that one wasn't it.
Thank you. Question to both of you. Have you ever had a situation in politics that you had to compromise on ideas of liberty to accomplish something, and it was maybe tough? Can you give us some examples of those situations where you couldn't really stand on principle because there were other reasons to go forward? You want to take that, Alex?
Yeah, absolutely. So like most hard questions in politics, this is really a definitional question. What do we mean by compromise? Well, in my world, right, I divide compromise into two categories. There's a good kind of compromise and a bad kind of compromise. The good kind of compromise is where you take the world in a more pro-liberty direction, but maybe just not as much as you had hoped. That's a good kind of compromise, right? Because it actually lets you make progress. I know My good friend Glenn is probably sitting somewhere here in the room if he's not still sleeping off his hangover. And he told me something very, very wise years ago, which was, Alex, I'm not really that concerned over these debates as far as how far should we go. He goes, I tell you what, we both agree we need to walk in that direction. And once we get there, then we can argue about it. That's a good kind of compromise. Bad kind of compromise is when you actually do something that takes the world in the wrong direction, the direction of autocracy, right? Those are kinds of compromises that I have not really had to make in my career. Those are the times where you take the hard vote, you go back to your voters, and you explain exactly why you voted in a way that may seem distasteful to them, and you explain the principles behind this. I had this come up. As you know, in Arizona, we have serious border issues. The Chinese are flooding our state with fentanyl. It's a terrible, terrible problem. And the chairman of the Judiciary Committee wanted to run a bill that used something called the felony murder rule, which is a neat end run around the Constitution's due process clause, where you say, okay, I'm going to let you convict somebody of murder, even though they didn't intentionally kill anybody, because somebody died in the commission of another crime, right? Which does not comport with my notions of due process anyway. Obviously, a very politically difficult vote to take to kill that bill. And I had to kill it 3 times, by the way, along with some liberty-minded Republican friends in the legislature who are also willing to take a hard vote for constitutional principles. And then what I did is I made videos and I went to my voters in my district and I explained why I thought this was a serious due process problem, that this use of the felony murder rule, or really any use of the felony murder rule. And the weird thing was that once I explained it to my voters, they agreed with me. So Mr. Oliver says, okay, well, when a liberty-minded person runs as a Republican, they become more Republican and less liberty-minded. No, actually, when a liberty-minded person runs and wins as a Republican, they have the opportunity to bring the party and the people from whom all political power ultimately flows more in the pro-liberty direction, and it makes the Republican Party more libertarian.
Thanks. Chase?
So there's some areas of agreement here, actually. We can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good sometimes, but there are some times where you must stand on principle, because otherwise is to compromise in a way that is bad. It's unconstitutional, or it's wrong. And I have this conversation all the time with my friends who are anarchists. I'm a minarchist, and I say all the time, like, let's keep reducing the state till we get to where I'm like, this is the size of the state, and then we can fight, because that's when the fight's worthwhile. Until then, we need to be continuing to fight to reduce the size of the state. And so I understand that notion, and I also understand that there's a need for compromise. Like, I believe taxation is theft, and we should have no income tax at all. But I would immediately support anything that cuts the income tax today, that keeps cutting it down, right? As long as we're cutting spending to correspond with that, so we're not creating the backdoor of inflation. That's a whole other thing. But, I understand the notion of, like, you don't get everything you want immediately. And so sometimes you do have to compromise when it comes to those things. Education is a big one. I in the minarchist ideal, all education would be voluntarily funded. There would be no need to tax people for it. It would just come out of the charity and the needs of the people, without having to have a centralized government tax you for it. But absent that ideal, I'm going to fight to fund the student, not the system, with taxpayer money. Because if we're going to fund education with taxpayer money, it should fund the individual student and not the overall school system as a whole, which is made up of administrators and bureaucrats and red tape. I find that to be a better allocation of resources. Even if I find taxation to be theft, and even if I find the idea of government-funded education ultimately my ideal to be wrong. But I still understand that there are things we have to work towards that improve the liberty ideal in those directions. Absolutely. But there are also times when you must stand on principle, when there is no compromise, when you have to say no. And some of those are the most difficult votes. Those are votes on, like, war and peace, right? When there's a vote to declare war, you can't say, well, I voted this way, even though principally I don't feel that way. No, you need to vote with your principles when it comes to war and peace. And if we did that, we'd probably have less wars in the world. So there is definitely areas where, in terms of communicating to voters, I've had to compromise my ideal policy for what I think is possible, for what I think we can communicate easily to voters, and certainly what we think we can get done to move liberty in the right direction. I would say there is an opportunity when libertarians get elected as Republicans. Sadly, the opportunity gets wasted every time by the national leadership, and that's the problem. If Ron Paul were being elected president, that'd be a different thing. But sadly, Ron Paul got completely squashed in 2012. His delegates were silenced, and the system ran against him. This is what happens anytime anybody tries to get high enough in the system. And I respect the work that Liberty Republicans try to do. I respect a lot of the work that Thomas Massey's done. He would get more done if we had a more open system with more parties. That's the problem, is that we're stuck in this false political binary, and we have to force compromise when that happens. And unfortunately, many times when we force that compromise, unintended consequences happen. And we have to explain that to our supporters, to our voters, to our constituents. And it's not an easy vote. As you said, sometimes that's the hardest conversations you have with voters, is on those tough votes. And I respect that there are tough votes out there. So there's some area of agreement there between you and me, I think, on that.
So last question from myself before I open it to the floor. And I want quick answers here. So political campaigns in the United States are very, very costly. Yet the resources are limited. The people who believe in liberty, they have a choice. They can spend $1 on Liberty International, on Cato Institute, on Mises Institute, on education of people, liberty camps, other things, instead of spending them on political signs, political banners, especially if these political campaigns of liberty-minded people usually, not always, but usually end up with big losses. But yet, you are politicians, you are raising funds. Why would a libertarian spend $1 on you rather than on educational and other efforts to promote freedom outside of politics?
Very quickly, I can answer that. In my race, it was the presidential race. It's the most high-profile political event that happens. It's the one that is the most in the eye and the consciousness of the voters. And so it's important for us to be fielding a candidate that can put those ideas forward. I did so with $500,000 running against a $1 billion campaign. And so we recognize we're going to be outsized by resources, but with enough resources, we can put the ideas out there that hopefully shift the Overton window more towards liberty. And certainly it's important to do that in the most high-profile political races, because that's where most voters are paying attention. We pay attention to Cato. We pay attention to Mises. We pay attention to a lot of these institutes as political insiders. But the average voter, they are too busy to be worrying about that. They just go in and they go to vote. And so it's important to have liberty voices in those very, very high-profile instances. Not that it's not worth donating to organizations like this. There's absolutely value in both of those things, but you have to run campaigns in order to get the political consciousness aware of liberty ideas.
So in my case, it's that as opposed to the race Mr. Oliver was running, my race was not the most high profile, but it is the most important position that we elect in this country, which is the state legislature. That's the way the framers designed this system, where the federal government only has certain enumerated powers. Obviously, it's gotten too big for its britches in a lot of regards, but still the vast majority of laws are made or unmade at the state level. The vast majority of laws that govern your life are state laws. And if you don't put pro-liberty people in where they can actually make a difference, the rest of what we're all doing is essentially intellectual masturbation, for lack of a better word. And that's why I think Mr. Oliver's push for ranked choice voting is so ultimately destructive. Ranked choice voting will not give us more freedom candidates. Let's be very clear. Ranked choice voting will ensure that our state houses and our Congress and every other position in any state that uses it, it will ensure that all of those positions are filled by fascists. Okay? What do I mean by fascist? Words have actual meaning, and fascist means that you want state and corporate power to merge. That's what a fascist is, right? Those people in our political system would be described as moderates. Okay? Those are also the people that are most gun happy to go around and use the prosecutorial system to try to throw their political opponents in jail. Those are the people who unanimously love the things that Mr. Oliver hates, endless wars, the surveillance state, all of that, right? Because when you switch to a ranked choice voting system, what you get is the second choice of most voters, and the second choice of most Republican voters is the first choice is conservative, Republican, right? And the second choice is a moderate, right? Same thing with Democrats. First choice is a progressive. Second choice is a moderate. The place where the battle has to be fought is over what a conservative candidate is. Is libertarianism an inherent part of being a conservative or not? And the way that we fight those battles is to donate to, pound the pavement for, make phone calls for Republican candidates who think that it is. That's my pitch.
And I saw, Chase, that you maybe want to make a replica about very quick, okay?
Yeah, just very quick. Let's just do a quick exercise on ranked choice voting. Okay, you're going to play the part of Kamala Harris, okay? Like, you're the Democrat, you're the progressive. You're going to play the part of the Donald Trump, the conservative. I'm going to play the part of the libertarian. There's 11 voters, all right? 5 have selected Kamala Harris. 4 have selected Donald Trump. 2 have selected the libertarian. Kamala Harris wins. But in a ranked choice world, that Republican can then go to the libertarians and say, if you make us your second choice, here's what we're going to give libertarians, X, Y, and Z. They're going to make an offer to us, and we're going to say, that sounds pretty attractive. We're going to put Donald Trump as our second choice of the ballot. When the lowest number of voters are eliminated their first choice, their second choice flows to Donald Trump, the Republican wins. When you have ranked choice voting, it has the major parties, and obviously Kamala Harris would have come to me too, going, vote for me because I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And I would have ignored her and said no. But the point is that when you have ranked choice voting, it has the major parties coming to the minor parties saying, here are the concessions we will provide to you if you give us your second vote. That allows for more civic engagement. That allows for less attacking minor parties and actually working with them and bring about more libertarianism. I think that's a better way to do it, just my personal opinion.
And with that note, let's open it to the floor. Okay. Our volunteers will handle.
So many hands going up so quick.
Thank you. On ranked choice voting, using your definition of fascist, first of all, we already have a choice between a fascist Republican and a fascist Democrat. They just have different corporations that they prefer. But so what I want to know for you, because I know Alaska, the voters were kind of confused, so they just removed it. But are you saying that there are more fascists in the government in Alaska and in the many cities that already have ranked choice voting compared to the amount of fascists in the U.S. federal government now where there's no ranked choice voting? I just want to be clear.
So I appreciate that question. And I, as a former civics teacher, I probably should have laid a little bit more educational foundation, okay? The way that Mr. Oliver is describing Republicans, from my experience in the legislature, behind closed doors, is an accurate description of about half of Republicans, okay? It is not an accurate description of the other half, or maybe third. It might be third, right? It's an accurate description of almost all Democrats, by the way. What ranked choice voting does is elevate those Republicans and Democrats for whom it is an accurate description. Who did Alaska start electing when they started using RCV? The ultimate establishment creatures. That would fit my definition. And I know, I'll stick mostly to the state I know best, Arizona. The unfortunate fact for Mr. Oliver is that the Libertarian Party is actually not the second choice of most voters in a multi-party system. It's not even the second choice of most Republican voters in a multi-party system. In a multi-party system, the moderate party, whatever it is the second choice of most voters. Libertarians, maybe they'd be third, fourth, who knows, but they wouldn't be second. So it actually doesn't accomplish the goal that he purports that it accomplish. All it does is allow lots and lots and lots and lots of centrists to get elected. But unfortunately for you guys, the only real opportunity that you have to actually make an impact on policy is through the conservative wing of the Republican Party. And the efforts would better be spent engaging in those primaries, which, by the way, just a small number of people can make a massive difference in a Republican primary for state house. If you get 10 people together, you can elect a liberty-minded Republican, right? So rather than wasting resources trying to bring about your own destruction by pushing ranked choice voting, get in the fight at the state level. Mr. Oliver talks a lot about what's wrong with D.C. There's a lot wrong with D.C., but guess what? The states, we have the power to bring about liberty in our lifetime.
Hi, my name is Ray from Chicago. And what this discussion is so valuable. I would think we should have some form of this discussion at every libertarian gathering because it's very important. And as you're speaking, I am reminded of the late Friedrich von Hayek's essay from 1950, Why I Am Not a Conservative. And so, do any of you feel like, well, it was Rothbard, I think, who said that liberalism, American liberalism, is one wing of libertarianism, and conservatism is another wing. So does any of that fit for any of you? You too, Jacek, I want to hear what you think. Does it ring for you? Is it off base? What do you think?
Yeah, I absolutely think there's, certainly in the libertarian movement, there is room for all kinds of thought, so long as you're focused on not using the monopoly of force of government to push your way or your thinking on another person. You can be as conservative as you want. You can in your own personal life. You can be as outside of the box as you want in your own personal life. Just don't use the force of government to impose on other people. The liberal side of that is that we live in a system where we have checks and balances. We are supposed to be able to support the idea of defending one's civil liberties. That should be the only legitimate use of government. And the conservative side of that is that we want government to do less because it doesn't have a lot of resources. It spends way more than it takes in. And so I think there's a natural wedding of both of those things. You can be as far along the left or right axis as you want to be. For me, so long as you're on that more liberty side of the axis as opposed to the authority side of the axis. I know people who are way more conservative than I am, and they are just as libertarian as I am.
So I want to address that too, because you've just asked the most important question that anybody has asked today. And the answer to your question is yes. Yes, they are. There are for example, in the progressive movement, right? They're terrible on a lot of issues from a liberty perspective, but there's a few things where I've been able to join forces with the progressives to kill really, really tyrannical policy, because at least they've got some principles sometimes, and some very small margin of those principles actually bends towards liberty. Which gets me back to, again, why I hate ranked choice voting, because not only are you going to gut the liberty wing of the Republican Party if you get ranked choice voting, but you're also going to gut the progressive wing of the Democrat Party. And these are the two factions in our politics that sometimes actually stop the evil, tyrannical growth of the state, that sometimes throw sand in the gears of the establishment, that sometimes prevent the handout of taxpayer money to corporate cronies, that sometimes fight back against attacks on our civil liberties. And so congratulations, if Mr. Oliver gets his way, we will be rid of both of them. And nobody in the future will ever get to see that that is in many ways a correct statement that you have made.
I just want to also quickly respond. Very much agree with Chase here, and to a large degree with Alex, that inside the libertarian movement, we want to be open for different lifestyles, for different choices. We don't want to be, progressive or conservative, but we are happy to have people of different dispositions inside the freedom. And Liberty International is that kind of organization. We are not left libertarian, we are not right libertarian or center. We welcome people from different angles of the freedom movement. When it comes to left and right in the United States, well, I would measure them how much live and let live are they, Republicans and Democrats, and that is changing. But I kind of agree with Dave Rubin. I heard him saying this in his podcast last year. He came from the left because in the past, American left perhaps was, except of economics, because they were always terrible on this, they were maybe a little bit more live and let live party about personal freedom and so on and so forth. But Dave Rubin left the left. He claims that actually he finds more understanding on the right, American right, for different things like freedom of speech, including nasty speech, because freedom of speech is not always beautiful and nice. He finds more understanding towards concepts unknown to conservatives before, like gay marriage. They discuss these things. You can discuss these things at the right wing conferences now. On the left, forget about discussing climate change. Forget about discussing more freedom of speech in media and Twitter and so on and so forth. So I am very much with Chase, but I still measure the live and let live. How far, how much is one wing or another? So good stuff. Thank you.
Chase, I've lived in Maine and where it has ranked choice voting, and the results have been absolutely nothing of what you just gave as a theory with regards to that. It's been an unmitigated disaster. You were on the ballot there. Did anyone reach out to you to try to do exactly what you said in terms of, hey, vote for us, but we'll help give you something if you can get us that electoral vote in the 2nd District?
No, Donald Trump didn't reach out to me. There's probably a good reason for that. It's the fact that, by and large, we live in a political binary in this country. No, I don't think that's going to happen at the national level immediately. Those kinds of things are going to start happening at the local level. It's going to start happening at the city council level. But we have to change ourselves beyond plurality voting. Plurality voting traps us in a system where we have a Congress that goes to our state houses and D.C. across the country where people with less than 50% of the support are running 100% of our lives. That is a problem. That's not even tyranny of the majority. That's tyranny of the minority. We have to find a better system to be able to pick our leadership than just first past the post plurality, because that reinforces that there's only two choices. That reinforces an either us or them narrative. And it does move the pendulum. And right now, you're right. I left the left too. I was a former Democrat until Barack Obama stopped his anti-war promises dead in their tracks, right? And I became a libertarian. But what I see is regularly we're going to see a shift away from Democrats and the left being the only people who can't accept political conversations to eventually, as Republicans get more power, and for the next 4 years, you're going to see a lot of Republicans having their orthodoxies and refusal to talk about a lot of different things. This pendulum swings one way or the other, the pendulum of tyranny. It goes to the left wing, the right wing, and back again. For me, this is why I believe in having alternative voting systems. Ranked choice voting is not perfect. Voting is not perfect. Democracy is not perfect. No system of government is perfect. It's just that I find that kind of representative democracy be better than some of the others. So nothing's perfect.
Hi, Pericles from the Cato Institute. I suppose my questions are for Alexander. You have a lot of emphasis on current liberty-oriented Republicans, which I think there is some hope there, but it seems to overlook the decades worth of work from very principled libertarians at very principled institutions and in the Libertarian Party, who, because we know politics is often downstream of culture, have created the cultural milieu in which those ideas, which were once very scoffed at, are now becoming more accepted. But my question for you is more around your points around immigration. Do you happen to know how many legal green card applicants, the percentage of legal green card applicants that will be accepted in the United States this coming year?
So, want to address both of the points that you've made. Start with your question on the green card applicants. No, I don't know the number. Quiz time or whatever.
Give me a guess. I'm not
going to guess. But I'm sure you'll let me know.
3%. What do you think that number should be? And if it's a merit-based system, it seems to me that it would fall prey to the same problems that we saw in a lot of Soviet price planning. We know value is subjective. How would you determine the various consequentialist weighting to your merits that you're approaching? For example, in my home in Virginia, I have immigrants who help with my landscaping and my housekeeping. I'm not sure what their immigration status is, but how would you put their life, where would you rank it merit-wise compared to, let's say, the podiatrist I saw a couple of weeks ago for a foot issue I was having? Or, how would you make those kind of calculations?
So let me answer also the second part of your first round of questioning, which was the institutions. So I don't think that everything libertarians have done is worthless, not by a long shot. I think the Libertarian Party is worse than worthless. It's destructive. But libertarian institutions like Cato have been phenomenal. But you don't need a Libertarian Party to have a Cato. You could just have a Cato. And in fact, the Libertarian Party diverts resources that might otherwise go to Cato, right? So even if you place the value on these institutions, which I do, place high value on them, the institutions that are actually valuable from the Libertarian Party will be better off without the party. So that's the first thing I say. In terms of how I would value, I guess you're saying people's lives. Well, I would start by valuing the lives of Americans the highest, right? That I am part of the American government. I am elected by American voters, and specifically voters in my state and voters in my district. So the first thing I do is, who are the people that we can let in, if anyone, right? But who are the people we can let in that are going to make the people to whom I owe a fiduciary duty, right? Who are going to make them better off, right? Who are the people who could come to America who could make my voters better off, okay? And the answer to that question is largely how I dictate immigration policy. Probably the answer to that question is going to be folks who can be gainfully employed at a high enough rate that they are net taxpayers instead of net recipients of benefits. Probably the answer to that question is going to be people who can comport themselves peacefully.
We'll fix it.
Probably the answer to that question is going to be folks who are well educated and can perform useful services. The more useful, the better. And the usefulness of our services, I'm so sorry to say, it is measured, at least when the government doesn't get involved and distort it, right? It is largely measured by the compensation received, right? I look for young people who aren't going to be drawing down on the Social Security and Medicare benefits that my constituents are expecting to receive and that they paid into, and they paid into that system. Those are some of the ways that I would make that evaluation on behalf of the people to whom I owe a duty, which is the American people.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Chase. Gentlemen, great debate, great discussion. Thank you, audience.